In 2019, Filipinos were shocked by a grim headline straight from Cyprus, a small Mediterranean island nation so far away from the Philippines that it was probably the last place Filipinos had in mind as somewhere where bad news about their kababayans would be coming from. Now, sure, Pinoys are used to hearing bad news about other Pinoys based in other Asian countries and also the Middle East. At this point, we've become so desensitized by OFW-related news, no matter how horrible the details are. So, when news of murder involving Filipino migrant workers came directly from Europe, it seemed irresistible in the most harrowing type of way. This is the case of the Mitsero Killings. Mabuhay, LagimFam. Welcome to another episode of Lagim, a Filipino true crime podcast. This is episode 9 of season 4. If you're new here, you are in for quite a ride, as I will be doing something a little bit different in this episode, so make sure to stay until the very end. To my OG listeners, thank you for coming back and for always being patient when I'm being thrown a curveball that eventually causes delays in my episode releases. As you will hear and notice later, this curveball was very welcome this time and not a difficult one at all. So again, listen carefully to this whole episode and stay until the very end. Now, one or two of you may recognize today's case as I have already featured a shorter version of it on my Patreon a couple of years ago. Mind you, there were literally only 4 people or so on my Patreon, so the majority of you will probably not know what I'm talking about. Anyway, without further ado, let us dive right into this story from the diaspora. As always, details in this case might and will be triggering for some people, so please take care of yourself whilst listening. Cyprus. It is a small island nation situated at the northeastern end of the Mediterranean basin and is the third largest island in the region with an area of 9,251 square kilometers. Most of its residents are Greek Cypriots, followed by expats from around the world and then the Turkish Cypriots in the north. The Mediterranean country, said to be the birthplace of the goddess Aphrodite, is proud of its warm temperatures, white sandy beaches, clear waters, and rich, albeit partially turbulent history. For a tourist in need of a big dose of beach life, delicious Mediterranean food, or interesting culture, Cyprus seems to offer everything. But in April 2019, after Cyprus experienced extraordinarily heavy rainfall followed by extensive flooding, the kind that this country rarely sees, the usually Instagrammable Cyprus turned gray and gloomy, a perhaps ominous foreshadowing of what a couple of bikers and German tourists discovered in the village of Mitsero, located to the west of the country's capital, Nicosia. The bikers had heard of the so-called Red Lake and knew that, amongst other things, this was the place where scenes from a certain movie were filmed. Now, before your mind conjures up some romantic image of a lake that is perfect for your next travel vlog, let me explain first that the Red Lake is not red by some natural occurrence. The Red Lake of Mitsero had turned red due to mining activities that turned this body of water toxic. Weirdly enough, the lake has turned into a tourist attraction of sorts for those who like to travel off the beaten path. For these bikers, though, their day out to see the Red Lake would quickly turn into a nightmare they'd rather now forget. The group of thrill-seeking bikers stopped at an old and abandoned mineshaft, as this was the location from the movie they had heard about. They were hoping to look down and take some interesting photos. Alas, the shaft was flooded, and so their view was pretty much obstructed, save for a tiny hole. One of the bikers then picked up a rock and threw it down the shaft for whatever reason. As the rock hit the water below, the bikers peeped through this hole and noticed a layer of dirt. This layer of dirt looked like it was moving, and as it continued to be moved, seemingly on water, it looked to the bikers like there was a plastic bag down the shaft. Now, we are talking about a distance of 15 to 20 meters between this plastic bag and the bikers above. The bikers, sensing that something was off about this plastic bag being in this location where there should not be anything, flagged down a vehicle that they saw nearby. There was a couple in it, German tourists who happened to have a professional camera with them. The bikers asked the Germans to come with them and use their camera to zoom in on this object that they had seen below the shaft. With trepidation, the Germans confirmed that what they were seeing through their camera was most probably a dead body. Two of the bikers then decided to climb down the shaft. As they neared the plastic bag, they grabbed a stick and poked the contents of the bag. It would seem that the bag was not fully closed up, as the bikers managed to turn over this bag and see that its content was indeed a human, with their feet tied together. The bikers and the German tourists called the local police authorities immediately. The police did not know then that they would be embarking on one of the largest criminal investigations that this small Mediterranean country has ever seen. On that day, the 14th of April, the police had assumed this was a one-off case that would be closed pretty quickly. How wrong they were. The police's investigation and efforts to identify the body led them down a rabbit hole that just got uglier by the minute. The body, as the police and medical examiner would later find out, was naked, bound, and wrapped in sheets before it was placed into the body bag. The body belonged to a Filipino migrant worker named Mary Rose Tiburcio, who, as we would later find out, originally hailed from Talavera, Nueva Ecija. Mary Rose was reported missing by her roommate on the 5th of May 2018, almost a year before her body was discovered at the Red Lake. At the time of her disappearance, Mary Rose was 38 years old, but that was not all. Mary Rose had a 6-year-old daughter named Sierra, who, as the police would soon find out, had also gone missing. With this, the stakes just got higher. The police's priority was to find Sierra, and they could only do so if they got to know who Mary Rose was. So the police decided to search her home. They went through her phone and computer and would soon learn that Mary Rose, amongst other things, was quite active on a dating website. It looked like she exchanged many messages with one particular man who, from the looks of it, eventually became her boyfriend. Through their investigation, the police were able to get both this mysterious boyfriend's email account and IP address. In order to get a better idea as to who this boyfriend was, the police proceeded to question Mary Rose's friends in Cyprus. They told the police that this mysterious boyfriend was together with Mary Rose for 6 months before she disappeared. The police then proceeded to look at Mary Rose's former partner, a Romanian national who also happened to be Sierra's father. He was eventually arrested on suspicion of killing Mary Rose and abducting Sierra, especially because Sierra's passport was found in his home. Clearly, the police wanted to be thorough. After all, the public and press interest in this story was growing by the day. Now, mind you, at this point in the investigation, we are only looking at only a couple of days from that fateful day when Mary Rose's body was discovered. The police, thinking that most probably Sierra was also dead and located near or even in the lake, planned on draining the Red Lake or at least the mine shaft to cover their bases, but these plans to drain the abandoned mine shaft specifically were aborted for fear of its structure caving in and fatally injuring police officers. By the 18th of April, the police arrested 2 further suspects, both officers in the Cypriot National Guard, men in uniform just like the police that arrested them. With this arrest, Mary Rose's former partner was released as there was no evidence to show that he was involved in either Mary Rose's murder or his daughter's disappearance. Now, these two new suspects were arrested following the investigation conducted by the police into Mary Rose's online presence. The names of these two suspects popped up and they immediately became persons of interest. By day 6 of the investigation on the 20th of April 2019, to be exact, the police were shocked to hear that another decomposed body was discovered at the same mine shaft where Mary Rose's body was found. It would seem that, just like Mary Rose's body, this second body floated to the surface and in the direction of the mining shaft because it was essentially displaced by the flooding from the previous days. This body was found quite by accident because the police were actually looking for Sierra specifically. Now, the post-mortem examination on this second body failed to identify her initially, but she was believed to be another Filipina named Ariane Palanas Lozano, something that was confirmed through DNA testing much later. Just like Mary Rose, Ariane was naked, bound, and wrapped in sheets when her body was found, and just like Mary Rose, she had been missing for almost a year since July 2018. Now, 24 hours before Ariane's body was found, but unbeknownst to the public still at that point, one of the two men who were arrested on the 19th of April started confessing to the murder of 5 women and 2 children. A day later, Ariane's body was found, indicating to the police that they now had to look for more bodies. The suspect who confessed was named Nikos Metaxas, a 35-year-old man who, as it turned out, had multiple fake profiles on various dating websites and social media platforms. On Facebook, for example, he called himself Orestes Apoel, an account that was then promptly deleted on the same day that Mary Rose's body was found. When the police realized that they had their man, the other suspect was released. As it turned out, the other suspect's photo was used on the same dating website that Mary Rose used, and as far as I understand, that person who used the photo may have been a casual chat partner of Mary Rose's, but that was really it. Now back to Metaxas. The police's attention was fully on him by now. Whilst being further interrogated by the police, another team started investigating the murders he confessed to. Now, I have to note here that the sources I used tended to give me some slightly contradicting information about dates of when the police found the rest of Metaxas's victims. So I've tried to just put together the information I found to the best of my abilities. Now, having said that, I believe the police wanted to first find another Filipino migrant worker whose disappearance was highlighted by the Filipino community in Cyprus after they had learned about Ariane and Mary Rose's fates. This Filipina was Maricar Valdez Arqueola, and it was believed that she went missing sometime in December 2017. Despite the police's best intention to find Maricar, I do not think they were successful initially, so they had to pivot and focus on another part of Metaxas's confession. He confessed to the killing of a woman of either Nepalese or Indian ethnicity, and having dumped her body in another town called Urunta. So the police proceeded to pull Metaxas's phone data to follow his movements over the past couple of years and hoped they could see where exactly in Urunta this body was dumped. It would not take long until the police found the third decomposed body of this nightmarish case. The body was later identified as belonging to a Nepalese immigrant worker named Asmita Kadkabista. She was believed to have gone missing in 2018 when her online presence and activity suddenly stopped. At this point, there was no doubt in the police's mind that they had stumbled upon a serial killing case that had gone on for seemingly years at this point. a serial killing that was being perpetrated by a man in uniform against vulnerable women. When a series of killings is perpetrated by someone against a vulnerable group of people, there is a level of trepidation and a looming distrust felt by the general public, who can suddenly also feel very unprotected by institutions like the police, who are supposed to keep them safe. Now, this dilemma or theme is in a way very prominent in a new show that I want to recommend to you wholeheartedly. This is a show that I've had the privilege of watching before it is being released to the public this coming June 1st. It is proudly Filipino made and very much something that true crime followers like you and I can sink our teeth into. This new show is called Cattleya Killer, starring Arjo Ataide, Christopher De Leon, Jake Cuenca, Ricky Davao, amongst many other excellent actors. If the title sounds eerily familiar to you, then you might be thinking of that Agamulak movie called Sa Aking Mga Kamay from 1996, where he played a serial killer of cheating married women, leaving Cattleya flowers on their corpses as his signature move. Cattleya Killer, the series, though, takes place in the same universe some 2 decades later. Christopher De Leon's character, Joven de la Rosa, who killed the original Cattleya Killer, is now a father of 2 adult sons, with whom he fosters a rather strained relationship. He is a high-ranking police officer at the Philippine Investigation Bureau, an entity obviously modeled after the NBI, where one of his best agents also happened to be his own son, Anton de la Rosa, played by Arjo Ataide. Much like the police in the Mitsero case, the police in this new show are confronted by the dead bodies of women seemingly found in proximity of water. However, unlike the Mitsero killings, the murders in this new series appear to be too clean, too perfectly executed, just too perfect, creating a whole set of problems for the investigators. When the body of a victim does not yield even the tiniest of trace evidence or any indication at all as to where they were killed or how exactly they were murdered, the investigation can easily screech to a grinding halt. It doesn't really matter how many victims keep on being found. A complete lack of evidence can easily thwart police efforts to find a killer. But come to think about it, what kind of person would know to completely eradicate evidence from a murder victim's body in order to stump investigators? I'll let you think about that one. Now, in our very real crime case today, there was no precedent in Cyprus for dealing with serial killings because, as you will be surprised to know, the Mitsero Killings would become the island nation's first ever serial killing case. But in the show I was talking about, there was clear precedent. The police had seen a similar modus operandi when the OG Cattleya Killer from the 90s left flowers on bodies of dead women before. What our intrepid investigation agents in the show could not figure out, though, was how this was all possible when the Cattleya Killer was clearly shot dead years ago. Surely it is not now him doing all these killings, or is it? Their minds, of course, immediately go to perhaps a possible copycat or a protege of the much-feared original serial killer, now maybe taking center stage and demanding the spotlight and their attention. The police obviously had a blueprint, but as you will find out in the show, even with case files to guide them, hunting down this seemingly new and improved serial killer was easier said than done. In the case of Metaxas and the Mitsero Killings, we know that modern technology helped a lot in tracking him down. We all leave so much digital footprint these days that it would seem inevitable that police officers would find something from Mary Rose's computer pretty quickly and very early in the investigation. In the show I was talking about, the killer was way too careful, and the investigating agents were not as lucky as the Cypriot police in Mitsero. Now, calling the Cypriot police lucky is probably pushing it. I take that back. After all, the police still needed to find around 4 bodies, 2 of which could be that of children, a most horrifying thought even for the police. By the end of April 2019, the police focused their search efforts yet again on the Red Lake. They know from their suspect's confession that most bodies were dumped in the lake or around it, so the police needed to try their best again to find the missing bodies. They knew from Metaxas's confession that apart from Maricar, he had also killed a Romanian woman and her daughter. At this point, of course, the police received confirmation from Metaxas that he had also killed Sierra, Mary Rose's daughter. This was never going to be a rescue operation where there was hope to find any of the victims alive. Since the confession, the case had become a recovery case, meaning that the police were just focused on retrieving the bodies of those Metaxas had confessed to killing. In the meantime, Metaxas appeared in court, and it was decided that he needed to further stay in police custody because, of course, the alternative of that would be utter recklessness. By the 28th of April, alas, a 4th body was discovered in the toxic lake of Mitsero. The police were thinking that this body either belonged to Maricar or to the Romanian national now identified as Livia Florentina Bunea, a 35-year-old migrant worker. The body found was stuffed into a suitcase, which was also stuffed with a cement block. This made sure that the body in the suitcase was weighed down and would not float back up. By the 29th, despite not being able to identify the 4th body yet, the police found yet another body in the Red Lake. Again, the identification process was problematic because of how badly decomposed the bodies were. I will have to add here, though, that the 3rd and 4th bodies found in the Red Lake were eventually officially confirmed to be Maricar and Livia when DNA tests were subsequently conducted. Nevertheless, at that point, the Cypriot police had to concede and admit how badly equipped they were for this kind of case. So much was at stake, and politically, this case was getting some attention too. More to that later. In the end, the Cypriot police asked the British police for help. The British police agreed to send them a coroner, a clinical psychiatrist, a forensic specialist, and some investigators more experienced in multiple murder cases or serial killings for that matter. The police were very much aware at this point that the discovery of Mary Rose's body and possibly Livia Bunea's body as well, there was a huge possibility that they would soon be finding their respective daughters who were also reported missing at the same time as their mothers and who Metaxas confessed to killing. And so, by the 5th of May, another suitcase was found near Mitsero, and this time it contained the body of 8-year-old Elena Natalia, Livia's young daughter. It was a heartbreaking day for everyone who had become so invested in this case, but especially for Elena and Livia's friends and family both in Cyprus and Romania. As for the efforts to find young Sierra, the police had to continue their search. I'm assuming here that Metaxas perhaps did not really reveal where Sierra was dumped or buried initially, but may have finally given the police some information much later on. I'm saying this because it was only by July 2019 that the police finally confirmed that they had found the body of young Sierra in a completely different lake in Cyprus called Lake Siliatos. With the recovery of Sierra's body and the increasing call for clarity on how Metaxas could get away with killing 7 people, it was time for the police to put together a timeline as to how these gruesome crimes came to be. In the show I was talking about, the Cattleya killer, the discovery of the victims happened in real time as the killer made sure the bodies were dumped in places where there eventually would be a lot of foot or vehicular traffic. The killer wanted the bodies to be discovered, but I hate to think what it would look like if he decided to hide them so well that it would take years and years to find those poor women. But this was what Metaxas did, though. He did more than that, actually. I think he was genuinely aware of the systems and systemic problems in his own country as he was counting on these issues to help him cover his crimes. He was a man in power, a man in uniform, a man in the National Guard. So one can assume that he knew the ins and outs of institutions like the army or the police. He is part of a similar entity after all. He knew what he had to do to avoid being caught, but he also knew the prejudices and biases of such institutions. Let me explain. In the investigation of the Mitsero killings, it was believed that the first victims to go missing were Livia and her daughter Elena. Both were reported missing in September 2016, 3 whole years before their bodies were recovered. In his confession, Metaxas admitted that he met Livia online and met up with her, which was the beginning of a mostly sexual relationship. Weirdly enough, Metaxas also confessed that he was somehow under the impression that Livia was pimping out her daughter Elena, and that this thought sort of consumed him, especially when he learned that Elena had learning disabilities. It was because of this belief that he justified killing Livia. Metaxas told the police that on the day he killed both mother and daughter, he was at their home. He said that he grabbed Livia by the neck and strangled her until she died. Metaxas admitted to the police that he stared at a now dead Livia for some time before going to where Elena was soundly sleeping. He said that he then strangled the little girl to death, which must have been an easy thing to do given her small size. Metaxas then told the police that he had to plan how to best dispose of those bodies. He started by placing Livia's body in the passenger seat of his car, whilst placing Elena's body in a suitcase. He drove back to his home to pick up another suitcase to place Livia in. With the 2 dead bodies in his car, he then drove to the Red Lake to dump them. He deliberately weighed down the suitcases to make sure that they did not float up. The probability of anyone finding them at the bottom of the lake was very low. No one swam in that lake anymore for obvious reasons, so Metaxas knew that the bodies would just decompose in the coming years until nothing was left. It was a perfect plan. Now, when people who knew the Romanian mother and daughter noticed their absence, they became worried. Some reports did mention that a report or reports were made to alert the police of their disappearance, but the police used an excuse to not do their work. An excuse they would end up repeating over and over again in the course of the next 3 years. Maybe Livia and her daughter just left the country without telling anyone. The next person believed to be murdered by Metaxas was Maricar. According to Metaxas, he met Maricar through Facebook. After getting to know each other, the two eventually became intimate. Metaxas believed her to be vulnerable due to the death of her husband. He recounted to the police that on the day Maricar died, both of them were intimate at Maricar's place. During sexual intercourse, he started strangling her to death because, according to him, she reminded him of Livia. Now, the police doubted this version of events. Why? Well, Maricar's remains were found with duct tape, and the same type of duct tape was found underneath the bed at Metaxas's home. It is therefore believed that Metaxas purposefully abducted Maricar and brought her to his home with the intention of murdering her. They did not believe that the two were intimate at all at Maricar's home prior to her murder. The police then explained that the next persons to be murdered were Mary Rose and Sierra. Metaxas then recounted the murder of the two. He stated that Sierra reminded her of little Elena, and he was also under the impression that Mary Rose was exploiting and abusing her child. Sounds familiar? This is a quote from his testimony to the police that was read out in court, translated into English, of course. Quote, "I picked them up on May 4th and took them to my house. We put the little girl to sleep, and I then told Mary Rose that I had money and that I would marry her, as I had told Livia. I had the same feelings for Mary Rose as I had for Livia, as I thought her daughter, too, was being abused by perverts. I then took her and strangled her. I then strangled Sierra while thinking of the Greek genocide of 1922. End of quote. This was such a bizarre detail, and Metaxas did not really elaborate why, of all things, he thought of the Greek genocide whilst killing an innocent 6-year-old child. When I read about this weird bit in his confession, I felt like he was confessing to this because he either really believed what he was saying, or maybe he wanted the police to believe that he was losing his grip on reality. It could make for a good insanity defense later, maybe. However, things turned out a bit differently later on, as you will hear, but this bit in his confession was just bizarre. The next person that Metaxas murdered was Asmita Kadka-Bista, the Nepalese migrant worker. He did not say much about how they met, but he did say that on the day he murdered her, both of them had sexual intercourse, during which Asmita spat at him. He was angered by this and said that she reminded him of Livia, yet again. It would seem that all the women that came after Livia reminded him of her, or he was trying to use this as some sort of defense for the atrocities he committed. Not that it made sense or worked at all, I must say. Now, Metaxas then admitted that following this spitting incident, he proceeded to strangle her to death and dump her body in a well near a firing range in Orunta, as I've already said earlier in this episode. This leaves us with the murder of Arian Lozano. I could not find any specific details about Metaxas's confession in relation to Arian, but what we do know is that she was found pretty much in the same way as the others, naked, bound, and stuffed in a suitcase. It is therefore not a leap of imagination that she was perhaps also strangled by Metaxas, who then also dumped her body into the Red Lake. Just as a side note here, during the police's investigation, it also came to light that Mary Rose Tiburcio's friend had begged her to not meet up with Metaxas on the day she eventually disappeared and not to bring her daughter Sierra along with her. But Tiburcio told her friend that Metaxas, her then boyfriend, insisted that she brought her daughter along so that Sierra could play with his 2 small children. Yes, he was a father of 2 children. This is eerie and indicates to me premeditation and steadfast intention to hurt both mother and daughter. Now, with the disappearances of the Filipinas in this case, the Filipino expat community was not silent at all. They raised awareness and reported their missing kababayans to the police. But the police were slow to take action and offered the same excuse they offered when Livia went missing. Maybe the Filipinas simply flew back to the Philippines without telling anyone. It is an excuse that can easily paralyze a community trying to find their friends. It is an excuse that can also easily and inadvertently allow a serial killer to run amok and kill mostly Filipinas or Asians in a small country with a rather big Filipino community. I want to highlight here that what happened in Cyprus is not surprising at all, even though it was still shocking. The Filipinos in Cyprus had reported the women missing, but because these Filipinas were not seen as important, but merely as cheap laborers, the value put on their lives was not as high as that of perhaps another European going missing in Cyprus. I'm, of course, only speculating. We have seen this play out over and over again in other OFW cases around the world, where it almost feels like the bodies of Filipinos, especially Filipinas, are commodified for work, used and abused, so to speak. But the Binays themselves are almost not even seen as humans. At best, they are treated as second-class citizens. Equality in rights is a running problem in a lot of countries with huge populations of Filipino migrant workers. In the show that I was talking about earlier, The Cattleya Killer, we also see a blatant violation of female bodies. The women have something in common, as you will see once you watch the show. In both our true crime case and the Cattleya Killer case, women are purposefully targeted. Why? Because it is easy, and because it all follows a trend that has been going on since time immemorial, where a specific type of man had fully learned to view women not as humans, but just as objects and bodies to violate and kill. Fortunately, in the Mitsero Killer TV series, the police are not obstructive and unwilling to do their job. In fact, they are quite focused and invested. I was especially pleased to see a female investigating agent, played by actress Jane Oineza, involved in the investigation of the Mitsero Killings, because in some true crime cases, and the operative word is some, having female agents or officers just introduces a different approach in a policing system that has been for centuries dominated by men. The show certainly gives us a glimpse of what can be done and achieved when the police really do their job and do it properly. But alas, in the real world, biases and prejudices tend to cloud the judgment of even the most experienced investigators. In May 2020, Attorney General Kostas Klarides of Cyprus said in a statement that 15 members of the police force may have breached the law or had been negligent in their duty in relation to the Mitsero murders. Klarides said he launched an investigation that subsequently yielded an independent police complaints authority report. The report found that some actions went beyond mere oversight on the part of some police force members and constituted the basis for establishing that a criminal offense may have been committed, which is just a fancy way of saying the police had possibly messed up and they may have to answer to the law. Klarides provided no further detail at that time, but there were allegations that the police failed, as I've already mentioned before, to take seriously initial missing persons reports about the victims. This could ultimately or may have answered the question already as to why Metaxas was able to operate undetected all these years. The friends and acquaintances of the victims were simply not believed or taken seriously. Unfortunately, by June 2021, the tune from the Attorney General's office changed. The new AG, George Savides, said in a statement that a thorough re-examination of the Mitsero cases found that the prosecution couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the police officers involved deliberately neglected their duties. Evidence supposedly suggested that officers assigned to the investigation had been negligent in carrying out their duties to one degree or another, but there's no proof that they did so deliberately. Savides' office shared that the actions of the assigned police officers didn't demonstrate the intent to not carry out their duties to the required degree or to look the other way. This is a direct quote from the statement. If they failed to understand that the missing persons cases being investigated were connected to possible murder cases, then this by itself doesn't necessarily mean willful and deliberate negligence in carrying out their duties. End of quote. My question is, what action will constitute such negligence if not those? But I digress. The Attorney General's office said, nevertheless, a probe into how the investigation had been handled showed a series of systemic problems within the police force regarding its organization, training, and its members' competence, including an underlying racist perception of some of its members. The AG's office said the cases of the 15 police members will revert back to the Independent Police Complaints Authority for possible disciplinary action. On a personal note, I would argue here that not only were the perceptions of the 15 police officers influenced by their racism, but also misogyny and classism. All of the women were housekeepers or domestic workers of some type after all. Again, I will refer back to my point about our OFWs in other countries, especially the Middle East. Listen to this. A couple of years ago, Kuwait mandated that domestic workers should be able to keep their passports and have days off. Following this announcement, a prominent Kuwaiti influencer so audaciously ranted on Instagram that she could not possibly imagine having a domestic worker with days off and the right to keep her passport. She said some other incendiary things that I dare not repeat in this episode, but the bottom line is that she did not see migrant workers as people with full rights and agency, and therein lies the problem. My point remains, Filipinos abroad are so vulnerable already because they are foreign to the country they are in. They are women, they do not have a financial and status upper hand, and they are not even protected from afar by their own government, or at least the protection is not enough. The subsequent rage shown by the Filipino community in Cyprus was very much understandable and perfectly justified. One Cypriot paper wrote an article, and this is a quote that I found very reflective of how women felt at that time. Quote, "If the state can't provide the minimum level of protection to the most vulnerable in society, the authorities must make effective reforms, starting with a new police detective division to investigate crimes against women. The majority of violent crime is carried out against women, so introducing a division which concentrates on building offender databases and profiles would lead to faster action when these devastating events occur." End of quote. After the AG's decision about the 15 police officers was made public, protests were organized by women on the island. The protest was specifically organized by POGO, the women's branch of the opposition party AKEL. Women carried signs with slogans such as "The patriarchy is murdering us every day" or "Shame on the Attorney General." In reference to the Attorney General's decision, a spokesperson of the group stated that, quote, "The decision, in our view, shows tolerance for unacceptable, half-hearted, and racist behavior and sends the wrong messages to society." End of quote. Now, you might be wondering, whatever happened to Metaxas's trial and the case in general? Well, following his arrest and charging, Metaxas needed to appear in court a total of 8 times during the summer of 2019. He chose to appear in court without a lawyer in all those times. All in all, 6 criminal cases were filed against him, 5 of which related to the 7 murders. Finally, by the 24th of June 2019, he pled guilty to 12 charges relating to the abduction and killing of Mary Rose Tiburcio, Sierra Grace Siocaliok, Arian Palanas Lozano, Maricar Valdez Arqueola, Livia Florentina Bonea, Elena Natalia Bonea, and Asmita Kadka Bista. In tears, Metaxas apologized to the victims' families and said he did not know why he committed these hateful crimes, something I thought was a bit of a cop-out. He said, quote, "Cypriot society will be wondering how one of its members reached this point. I've also asked myself why. I've not yet managed to find an answer." End of quote. Metaxas said he was willing to assist the police authorities in search for those answers. He was subsequently sentenced to 7 consecutive life terms in prison. He was not expected to appeal, and as far as the internet is concerned, he has never appealed his case or sentence. Several women would come forward after this case concluded and even during the investigation. They came forward to accuse Metaxas of rape, and he would eventually face additional charges. In investigating these rape cases, the police would later admit that crucial evidence to support the other complaints of rape against Metaxas had most probably been destroyed by Metaxas himself. Some evidence, however, did survive, and although these did not directly help the cases of the other rape victims, they certainly showed that Metaxas targeted women with purpose, plan, and intent. When Metaxas was first apprehended, after all, he attempted to swallow a SIM card that contained details of the women he had met online. Luckily, a female police officer was able to stop him, and the SIM card was subsequently used in the investigation into the 7 murders. There were other names on the SIM as well. These women were not necessarily victims or victims of rape or any other crime, but the police still found it necessary to check in with them. These women remained unharmed. Here's another one for you. When Metaxas was already incarcerated, his mother smuggled another SIM card containing even more contact details of women, but the SIM card was thankfully confiscated. The police called all the women on that list. All but one were accounted for. The police nevertheless believed that there could be more victims out there, both living and dead. Metaxas, I presume, did not help the police further dig his own hole, and so the police will never really know who else had been hurt by Metaxas unless the public raises concerns further down the line about missing people. As for our murdered kababayans, by July 2019, we learned that the remains of Sierra, Mary Rose, and Maricar had been repatriated to their families back home in the Philippines. Ariane Lozano's remains would be repatriated shortly after. In light of what happened in Cyprus in the summer of 2019, the then Cypriot President Nikos Anastasiades expressed deep frustration and shame over the hideous crimes committed by Metaxas. He said, quote, "These hideous crimes do not reflect the moral values of our multicultural society, our sense of compassion, and our inherent respect to all those people who have searched for a better future in our country and have become an integral and valuable part of our lives." End of quote. He also acknowledged the positive contribution of the Filipino community to Cyprus, especially as it is one of the biggest expat communities on the island. He vowed to keep the dialogue open between the community and Cyprus in order to establish ways to keep Filipinos safe in Cyprus. To the families of the murdered women and children, I hope you can find closure and maybe find peace in the knowledge that what happened to your loved ones sparked a movement and hopefully gradual change in Cyprus. Know that I and many others mourn the death of your beloved ones. We mourn the memories they will never be able to make with you, and we mourn the people they will never get to become. LagimFam, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Lagim. I hope you found this episode valuable and or interesting. Now, you may have noticed by now that I have added a little something in there for you. The people behind the new TV show Katleya Killer were nice enough to approach me about helping them get the word out about this rather interesting project. Like I've said in the episode, I've had the chance to binge watch the whole series before its official release on June 1st on Prime, and I was genuinely surprised in the most positive way. The quality of the show is unlike anything that I've ever seen on Filipino TV before. It is gritty, it is thrilling, the cinematography is amazing, and it hooks the viewers in with complex narratives on love, relationships, and even death. Episode 1 will really reel you in because it sets the stage for the rest of the show by referencing the now closed case of the Katleya Killer from that 90s movie. In a way, it deals with some of the same themes as the 1996 film Sa Aking Mga Kamay. But I was really impressed, for example, by how the main character, Anton's character arc, was so well done, and it was still able to surprise me despite months and months of poster spoilers already giving you a hint that he may or he may not have something to do with the killings. The show also does a superb job of misleading you before the grand finale. I love that. The show also does a superb job of misleading you before the grand finale. Is this really just a case of a copycat killer, a student of the OG Katleya Killer perhaps? Maybe it is just another psycho, or maybe it is someone possessed by the devil, or maybe all of the above. The best way I can describe the 6 episodes is crime fiction procedural a la CSI mixed with a bit of Pinoy TV drama, but the best bits of it. So make sure to watch out for its release on June 1st on Prime and do not miss it, LagimFam. As a fan of crime fiction, I do hope we get to see more shows like this in the future. If this is how the future of Pinoy TV looks like, I'm very excited indeed. Again, LagimFam, make sure to watch out for the new TV show, Katleya Killer. It will be shown on Prime. All the details that you will need in order to find this, in order to subscribe, will be in the show notes. LagimFam, thank you for staying until the very end. As per usual, make sure to follow me on all my socials and check the show notes on how to best support this little passion project of mine and how and where to find this new TV show that I've been ranting about, Katleya Killer. Until next episode, thank you so much, LagimFam. Maraming salamat at mabuhay.